And so we spend a lot of time in Nebraska about sharing perspectives with one another. It's an arduous process. Some people say talk is cheap, and you spend all kinds of time talking and nothing ever gets done. Not my experience. My experience was the exact opposite. My experience was once perspectives wound up on the table, now that was challenging, but once honest perspectives wound up on a table, then we were actually finally able to sort of find those bridges. So those come out in perspectives. And perspectives are most often seen by stories. Now there's one hitch, and this is where I'm going to actually start, in terms of the lessons learned and what we can do to create very effective campus community collaborations that involve the retail industry, that involve enforcement, that involve campus administrators, that involve every stakeholder. That's the point. Every stakeholder to help create their ideal community. It starts also by recognizing that our society has lots of stories, right? Because we have this media. And media likes to tell the college drinking story in some very specific ways, connected to how it likes to tell the drinking story, or what we would call the alcohol story. So you have in every community a set of what we call master stories or meta-narratives, if you want to get really scientific about it, that circulate around that we have to address, and we're going to have to look at. I want to talk about a few of those as we get started. Right? So what I'm saying to you is that all of our discussion, all of our talk exists within our stories. And I want to start with what we call the regular American story. Alcohol has been connected to the American dream. We've known for years in social science that alcohol and the type of alcohol that we drink actually becomes an indicator of social class, right? And so you have the good old boy network on your left, right? And again, notice how Obama has changed the world by having a beer with the world. Have you noticed this? We're just going to have a beer together. Me and Putin, we're just going to drink a beer. And what a change that is, but smart, 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 because we've always had a meta-narrative that said friends gather around a beer. Friends come together around a beer, and so we have a very important story about where alcohol and the neighborhood bar and all those sorts of things fit into our society. It's part of the irregular American, right? And a very important part of the American story. But it also is an indicator of class, as you can see on the right, because we have certain alcoholic beverages and certain social rituals that are designed for very specific people, right? And certainly this is important in a college culture. First of all, because remember, I have young adults who are trying to understand what adult life is, right? I have the same thing in my community with teenagers. This is starting at around 12, so now we're saying even 10, where I'm starting to envision what adult life is. And so as I experiment, then I start to try to find how this fits for me and how this works in our adult life. This story becomes very important. The coming of age story. On a college campus, in a college community, we have this concept, this meta-narrative that says at some point you must sow some wild oats. Notice these pictures are primarily male. Have you noticed that? Which is interesting because actually, because this story has been a male-dominated story, we are now seeing college-age female drinking matching. We're seeing some very different kinds of behaviors from this. I don't see women. I don't see a sorority gathering around a keg with all these funnels. But I do see a sorority getting 5 to 6 to 7 bottles of vanilla-flavored vodka and downing them all before they go out to an event, right? Doing what we call pre-drinking, engaging in what we're learning is blackout drinking with that extra purpose. That's happening with women as well, but it's part of the same story. That's the important thing for us to remember. But we oftentimes, again, see that this story, this perspective, kids will be kids, college students will be college students. And the pictures we see are always these kinds of fun, innocent, though very edgy pictures. The other side of this is what we call the tragedy story. And this story is not circulated nearly as much. I'm going to focus on 2 famous cases here. This case, the Scott Kruger story. Scott is from MIT, or went to MIT for a whopping 3 weeks. And back when MIT allowed first-year freshmen to live in a fraternity house from the very, very get-go at the university. And it's a great alternative housing. In some cases, it's much cheaper, and that was supposedly Scott's motivation for doing the same sort of thing, for joining Fiji, which was way across the river from the campus. And at his initial Pledge Father activity, which is very, very early in your identification of membership, Scott was overserved, overdrank, and passed away that evening. So radical was that impact that not only did it become a major media news beat, covered by, in my research, over 300 different journalistic outlets, some as recent as 2 years ago, even though his death was in 1995, that there was a tremendous amount of energy placed, and coinciding perfectly, by the way, with the Henry Wexler studies and coinciding with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So Scott became sort of the poster child for why we all had to address this on campus communities. The deaths continue, right? Our estimate, which is just an estimate from the NIAAA, is 1,800 college students die in some alcohol-related illness or injury or whatever a year. 1,800. In fact, we're starting to see some ties between suicide and alcohol that are concerning us. So what we have typically said is not an alcohol issue is in fact a suicide may in fact be an alcohol-induced suicide, which is very important for us to look at. And so we are still seeing a large number of deaths, but notice that you're not hearing these stories anymore. I was particularly interested in Samantha Spady's story. Samantha Spady is from Colorado State, was from Colorado State University, a native of Beatrice, Nebraska, which is how I got involved in her and her family. And Sam actually is a fascinating story because it kind of gets us to this issue about how the American tragedy story is told. It was told this way for Scott, it was told this way for Sam, and it was told this way for countless numbers of students who have died. The question is, what killed them? Why'd they die? And as we construct the tragedy story, we hear one of three things. One, we hear that very perspective, usually from the gang of the right, that says they died because the environment let them die, right? So in Sam's case, she was found in a fraternity house, and so the fraternity house was closed. The fraternity house was turned actually into a ministry house, which has a Sam Spady room, never to be changed. Somehow the fraternity killed Sam Spady. Well, here's the truth. Sam Spady went on a 3-day binge drinking experience, truly binging, and literally started on Friday night of Labor Day weekend and went all the way through the weekend, died the last day, but had been drinking throughout all of that, had been intervened with 3 times. One, which was a minor traffic incident, that as she was driving drunk, she was injured. I mean, she was in a minor, not injured, in a minor accident. And it was intervened by one of her friend's parents who said, probably need to slow down, but still wound up that night at a fraternity house, finished off one of those bottles of vanilla-flavored vodka, and didn't wake up, and died. So what killed Sam Spady? Who killed Sam Spady? The really difficult piece of this is Sam Spady killed Sam Spady. We have all kinds of Good Samaritan programs, we call them, or diversion programs, we call them, at college campuses around this idea that our job to spare someone's life is to intervene when they start to show symptoms that they are dying. Ignorance killed Sam Spady, and yet we don't address some of the much larger issues about how a college student is enabled through an environment to go through a 3-day binge, and how even moderate forms of intervention didn't seem to make any difference for Sam Spady, and why would that be, and how could that be? So again, this American tragedy story becomes one of the perspectives that get thrown in, and I hear it oftentimes when I meet with community members in a campus community who say, well, these deaths are going to occur. If you ask college students about deaths from alcohol, they will tell you this is a stupid drinker. They will call Scott and Sam stupid drinkers. But these stories also have to circulate and become perspectives as we have this conversation as a community about this. Now, one of the places where you have certainly seen the story start to coagulate has been around what we call the public menace story, which is certainly the drunk driver. right? And so we've all rallied around. In fact, college students love this story. You know, we often think college students are the most resistant to our efforts to try to change college drinking. Not true, by the way. Somewhat of a falsehood. But I will tell you that the vast majority of college students, especially those who want to sustain the kind of environment that meets their needs best, if I'm a stakeholder and I love to get very, very drunk, the last thing I want that's in my interest is for you to change the environment. And so I'm going to work very, very hard to change that. The first place I'm going to make agreement is, yes, you're right, we shouldn't drive. So we've seen lots and lots of support in our communities, in our campus communities around this drinking and driving effort. An important step. But there have been a number of communities who sort of stopped here. And it said, as long as I get you off the road. And remember, this kind of trickles all the way down to a very common problem in communities of the parent host of the teen drinker, who says, as long as I take away their keys and let them fall asleep in the basement, everybody's safe, it's all good. I'd rather you drank in my house than out in some field where you could do some real harm. So again, we see some connections when we think about those perspectives and how they influence the decisions that we make together as a community. Oftentimes our stories just don't connect dots, right? So we have stories about riots, we have stories about what a college scene is and what good college times are, good college memories are. We have stories about physical tragedies, and we have stories about all kinds of things that we've not really connected all the dots together. And again, I'm going to tell you that part of that is because we have not created the forum for us to have these kinds of conversations where we can connect the dots. When our community is able to come together after an incident and really have an open and honest conversation where we begin to share perspectives together so that we can start to identify ways that we want to really address the issue. And I realized that what I really needed to do was to help a community identify a student resident as a stakeholder, as a leaseholder, as a part of the economy, as a part of the environment, as a neighbor, and I had to work with that student to recognize those exact same issues as well. Why were these people wanting to yell at you? Why are these people so mad at you? I just 3 months ago did this exact same experiment, brought a forum together of community members and fraternity and sorority leaders at James Madison University in Virginia. And the students walked in saying, I know you hate me, but. And the residents walked in saying, I know you think you should have this much fun, but. And finally, with the opportunity of a forum, we're able to come back together and say both of those perspectives were completely meaningless. Nobody hated anyone, and people had some very real issues that they had to address that once we got through those perspectives and found the bridges, have made a tremendous difference. In fact, one of the most exciting things that came out of that conversation was something as simple as the neighbor saying, look, it's about the red cups for me. You guys go from house to house to house to party to party to party, and there's just this trail of red cups that goes all, because you all have red cups. I don't know what the red cup thing is, but you all have red cups. And someone said, well, that's easy. At all these parties, all we have to do is put out a trash can and people can dump them along the route. We can actually fix that. And the neighbors were like, okay. I've watched that miracle happen over and over and over again. But to get us there, we have to work through what I call a cacophony of perspectives. And we have to recognize that each perspective is as valid as the next perspective if it's based upon personal experience combined with our own personal view about that experience, right? You can see I kind of color-coded these. There is this marketplace kind of set of perspectives, that we have a free market and that this is what our kind of great country was built upon, right? The free market, that we have a legal product, and we have this very interesting perspective about revenue generation on a civic level, about the idea that I have to somehow generate tax revenue in my community. And this is a far bigger issue than we ever tend to address, especially in campus communities who tend toward revenue generation in ways that are not always connected to student perspectives, at least not 2015 student perspectives. I've heard from, let me give you just a slight example. I hear from more bar owners who say to me, I can't, if I don't have a really severe drink special, right, like penny a drink, penny a draw, $5 entry, if I don't do that, I can't make any money. And my bar will stay empty. There's too much competition and no one will come. If I price my beers $2 and higher, no one will come. And usually that's the point when I take them by the hand gently and I walk them down to Barnes & Noble. And I show them the packed Starbucks in Barnes & Noble, or the separate packed Starbucks store where you can never get a table, and Lord knows you'll never get a plug. Oh, Lord. You'll never get a plug because the place is packed. And I'll say, show me the average drink prices. And I will see young adults who will not pay more than 50 cents for a beer at your bar who are paying $4.25 for a caramel salted macchiato light foam whipped with goat milk. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? What's the difference? What's the difference? And how does that difference occur? So when we talk about revenue generation, we talk to a town council or a city council or a mayor about income generation for an entire community. When we talk about economic development for an entire community, again, we can talk about a real broad set of perspectives, or we can get stuck in some very, very narrow ways. Second line is what I call the social impact line. And here are, particularly from our policymakers within the community, but certainly within our community members, this entire set of perspectives that say, you're taking all my resources. So this resource use perspective is a very important one in this conversation about the resources that we have in the public, and more importantly, about our community environment. I was amazed at the success of the conversation in campus communities about the pride that many members have. Every time I go into a community, and I've gone into quite a number of them now, I walk in and we create a forum, because I'm big on these forums, I'm big on these conversations, and I always start by saying the same thing. Don't you love living in a campus community? And after the shoes have been thrown, I never let food in the room before I do this. I always wind up having the same reaction, because people are sort of like, no, I hate it. No, you don't hate it, or you'd move. And so again, this idea about what is community environment, and ultimately the question becomes, what is the ultimate environment that we want? What's our ideal? And it's amazing when you ask a group of stakeholders that very simple question. What's your ideal? Please tell me what your vision is of an ideal environment. What's the kind of community you want to live in? And the captain went first and said, I want a community that's safe, that I can grow, I can make money, and I can grow my family, and I can enjoy my family in safety. But obviously, I want a community that's got a little something going. I don't want to sit locked in my room, in my house, right? I want a place I can grow my family, have some fun, but is safe. And Anheuser-Busch person goes next. You took my answer. You took my answer. That's exactly what I want. The Mothers Against Drunk Driving person looked and said, this is crazy. That's exactly what I want. Three very distinct positions, if we're going to use that term in opposite of perspectives. One identical perspective. One identical interest. So suddenly our debate about what's the matter with all the college students and what's the matter with all the bars and what's the matter with all the problems connected to alcohol at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and Lincoln, Nebraska kind of went away, kind of disappeared. So again, these perspectives, there's the health and well-being perspective, what public health cares about the most, the quality of life perspective. This is a little bit different than the others that we talked about, different than community environment, is our actual health and safety. And then finally, we have this wonderful issue about personal choice. And the perspective that says, I have the right to make whatever choice I want to make. And obviously the counter to that, which is, I have a responsibility. So when we talk about this, we really are down to three very specific types of messages. Messages about substance, or perspectives about the substance, perspectives about the environment, and perspectives about the behavior. And we want to think about all three of those perspectives and how they marry together. But I'm always concerned about, and I'm most concerned, because these are two separate issues for me, local advertising. I'm very interested in spending an awful lot of time in communities looking around at signage and saying, so how do you present it on the local level? I may have much less effect with Madison Avenue that I will have in local bar and ask a bar, why is $7 all you can drink or $5 all you can drink on a Thursday, particularly a Thursday, a good deal for you, for your patrons, for your community? And again, we talk about behavior, and the term that we came up with that we found in shared perspective was the concept of high-risk behavior. I really like this perspective because it involves both our legal issues and age, minimum age, as well as maximum age, as well as understanding the effective behavior. So in our community, we said high-risk drinking, which is drinking that increases the negative outcomes for the drinker and the non-drinker. And then we tried to identify how, once we agreed upon that, we were going to address it through individual and environmental influences. I have to say a word about responsibility because I have to hats off the industry. It's come a very long way in what it used to introduce as a very ubiquitous, unclear, ambiguous term that has now become very, very specific with specific strategies that we know in public health make a difference in terms of moderate drinking that will lead. Now the connection to me is to help us again take responsible drinking or moderate drinking and tie it into how we create an ideal community. And really what we're after is to make those connections. Again, I can tell a college student, stop drinking like a crazy person out of moral reasons, I won't get very far. But if I can get us to agree that as stakeholders we share an environment. So my hope is that we'll continue in this responsibility work, which has been very good, that we start to tie it to the larger interest. Why do I drink responsibly? Because we all get what we want when I do. That's my dream, and that's why I try to get a community recognized. When we all drink responsibly, when we serve responsibly, when we retail responsibly, when we create the kind of environment that enables responsible, we all get what we want. That's the point. Notice how all of our headlines had war metaphors in them. Crack down on drinking. Fight binge drinking on and off campus. A staggering scene that the legacy of prohibition still affects what we're trying to do in our communities. And we act like we're at war. And it is one of the things we have to work on as we develop these collaborations, is that we overcome the war metaphor and we replace it with the interest metaphor. And so the way that we do that, to me, is called the community partnership story. And it's a story we can all contribute to regardless of where we are in our communities. We're all stakeholders. Servers and sellers are part of the community, and they share responsibility for its health and growth. They're just trying to make a living like all the rest of us. And they're doing it with a legal product, and they're doing it with product that's highly regulated. And there are the same temptations, so we can work together. Price, availability, and social function have a direct impact on consumption, but so do the stories that we tell. And so we work together as a community to get our stories and our perspectives together, to get them out on the table. So the idea is how we create a place where you say it, I say it, and we look at it and say, where's the compromise? What lives in the middle of that? What's the bridge? And I'm amazed at the tremendous number of bridges we find over and over and over and over again. More often than we don't.